Hey everyone, I'm Bigo, and what you're about to watch is raw footage from a mastermind that I held in San Diego full of 7 to 8 figure entrepreneurs, most of whom are software engineers. This entire session that you are about to see isn't about code, isn't about marketing funnels or client acquisition or any of that. In fact, it's about something that 99% of software engineers have never even heard, let alone seen before. And it is Hofstede's cultural dimensions. And it's the reason why I went from a junior developer to manager in under 3 years, and from a manager to running my own B2B software business in half the time. Now, before we dive in, on February 22nd, I am hosting a live free workshop focused entirely on ideation as a software engineer. The link will be down below. And if you enjoyed the mastermind you're about to watch and you would like to be part of our next mastermind in Japan, then apply for a code to CEO in the link down below, and I shall see you very, very soon. Okay, we're gonna switch the flow a little bit. Talk about Hofstede's cultural dimensions. Who are the software engineers here? You're not a software engineer.
I own a SaaS company.
Bro, a SaaS company doesn't mean you're a software engineer. No, it's you are, and yeah, you. Okay. So we have 2 software engineers. SaaS company, okay, you still listen to it, still important. It's not like you're gonna take anything away. But this is primarily gonna be for software engineers. Main reason being, Hofstede's cultural dimensions are what I have used to pretty much have one of the craziest promotions in all of tech that I've seen personally. I went from junior to pretty much manager level in under 3 years, primarily using these specific things. Now, the reason this is primarily for software engineers, I mean, you can use this for pretty much any other field, for pretty much any other working environment. But the reason that this works so well for software engineers is because nobody's kind of aware of it, okay? And especially if in a competitive environment such as in the US, where everybody's gonna be, trying to get the next promotion or whatever the case, if nobody's aware of it, you have an overwhelming advantage over your competition if you can properly and surely utilize these things. So without further ado, let's just jump straight into it. If you guys could please keep the questions to afterwards. This is primarily going to be for the YouTube audience, but you guys are more than welcome. If you want to ask questions, you can ask it at the end. So let's get to it. So if you don't know about Hofstede's cultural dimensions, it's pretty much the study on how different cultures are from one another. Okay, and not only the cultures themselves, but the people inside these cultures and how you should interact with somebody else from another culture. And the entire interaction pretty much is based on what they value and what they not, and essentially what they don't value. And this is extremely important for specific communication, especially understanding who you're communicating to, because your tone, the words you use, and the certain body language you use might come across as disrespectful to somebody from a different culture, okay? There's a lot of variance I'll jump into, but for now, let's just try to understand what the 6 dimensions actually are and how Hofstede's cultural dimensions are used to properly kind of quote unquote measure somebody, right? So first and foremost, we have the PDI, okay? This is the power dynamic index, okay? This is referred to as power distance index, power dynamic index, but what it's essentially about is the variance of how power is viewed in a specific culture. For example, if the wealthy and the lower class are somewhat equal, and is there such a disparity between power, or is there no such disparity? So of course, as you guys probably can tell, one of the biggest sort of proponents of this in terms of low versus high, right? So let's have a low over here. So low PDI versus a high PDI. So low PDI would pretty much mean that this specific culture values equality. There's no such thing as hierarchy, quote unquote, right? Whereas a high PDI would indicate that there is such a thing as hierarchy, and there is, of course, a power distance between, be it employees, be it people, whatever the case. So one of the lowest power distance societies or cultures is actually the US. And I know this might sound a little bit weird, but let me explain. So what I mean by this is, especially for you software engineers, many of you in Scrum meetings or in Agile meetings, and especially if you later set up your own business, you'll understand that you as a junior, you still had a say in a lot of the things in the company, okay? So you could potentially challenge a senior developer without worrying about repercussions or potentially being fired or whatever the case. So even in a Scrum environment, they might even tell you, hey, what do you think about this, right? Hey, John, what do you think about this? And you could be a junior, just started off, and they would still ask for your opinion, right? Now, that's because USA ranks relatively low in the PDI index. But if, let's say, we move on to another country, let's say China, okay? China. So in China, the power index, the power dynamic index is extremely high, okay? So their hierarchy is respected and authority is demanded. So a junior developer would never, ever, in their right mind, ever decide to challenge a senior developer, especially on a meeting. In fact, they would probably be very quiet and they wouldn't say anything unless spoken to. And in a specifically business environment, the CEO, the top of the company, wouldn't be easily kind of reachable, and somebody that's down in the chain wouldn't be able to just approach the CEO and casually talk. They would have to go through a proper chain of command to get to the CEO, right? Now, of course, this is somewhat seen in the US as well, but as mentioned before, this isn't like a black or white, it's more so like a grayscale. There's levels to this, but in general, US you could consider low, and in China, this would be considered high. So this is extremely important, whether you're a business owner or you're a software engineer yourself, to kind of understand who you're dealing with and which path you kind of have to go on, okay? If it's gonna require you to be more, professional with somebody and respect their hierarchy, you can change your entire communication style and the way you approach business to match them. If you know that hierarchy is there's no such thing as hierarchy in this case, everybody has, room to speak, then you would be best well to kind of allow that in your own specific culture, especially if you're working with people from somewhere like this, right? And to also kind of hear out the people under you or whatever the case, right? Next, let's move on to individualism versus collectivism, okay, the IDV. So once again, we're gonna have a low scale and we're gonna have a high scale. I'm gonna erase this at the very top because I'm sure you guys already understood it. Let me get this. Actually, let me make it a lot bigger. Low, high. So individualism versus collectivism is pretty much already kind of implied in the naming of it, right? How individualistic a society is versus how collectivist a society is. There's a construction going on, but hopefully you guys won't hear that. So it's again, low versus high, and go and behold, USA once again ranks at a low. So what this means is that USA is more individualistic. You can actually see this in the entrepreneur economy especially, right? Especially for software engineers. You have a lot of people now creating startups and they have this thing called personal branding, okay? Even what I'm doing technically right now. So we kind of put a face to the name, so to say, of a specific brand or a specific business, right? There's a reason you see Musk, for example, on Twitter, right, tweeting and so on and so forth. And so this is pretty individualistic. We tie the accomplishment of, let's say, the entire brand or the entire business to, let's say, one individual, right? We think more about ourselves in a sense. Now, this isn't to say like we're more selfish or whatever the case, but we're just more individualistic. And in individualistic societies, you'll also have a lot more kind of competition for promotions, a lot more sort of sway for, who'll do better than you, who's gonna get the bonus, whatever the case. There's a lot more competition because people believe that it's their individual efforts that bring in the grand result that they're gonna bring in, right? On the other hand, in pretty highly collective, right, more collectivism societies, right, cultures, so this would be something like Japan, which is extremely collective, you wouldn't have any of this individualistic stuff. So Japan is largely around team effort, okay? So there's no one person taking essentially the credit for everybody's work, right? It's very much team effort. Everybody's in it together and everybody wins together as a team. They don't have personal branding of one person, the face of the company, right? One person is doing the most for the company, whatever the case. Yeah, sure, it's still a bit cutthroat there in terms of you still need to perform, but it's a lot more about the team and the culture as a whole, as opposed to an individual, such as in the US. And once again, this is extremely important. Whether you yourself are a software engineer or you are a tech entrepreneur, you need to understand if the people you're working with, right, especially if it's a business partner or especially if it's a client, where they fall in this scale. Because if there's somebody more individualistic, then you can play to their strengths and get them to kind of compete with other people, reward them accordingly, tell them, hey, the salary bonuses, whatever the case, right? But if they're more on the Japan side of things, then you need to make it a more of a team effort, right? We did this, start using language such as we, not you, right? And that's for the individualistic versus collectivism. Now let's talk about uncertainty avoidance index. This is probably one of my favorite ones to talk about because it's probably got me the most ROI in terms of knowing about this. So once again, you have a low scale and then a high scale, okay? Uncertainty avoidance is really, just as the name suggests, how tolerant a culture is of risk or uncertainty. And once again, you have a low scale and a high scale, okay? Now, if we take a look at Singapore, okay, they actually like risk and uncertainty, which is funny because you would never thought that they would be kind of tolerant of risk, right? Especially when you think of Singapore. But they are quite tolerant of uncertainty and avoidance. In fact, when you work with people from Singapore, they are a lot more likely to actually test new features, new products, and do a bunch of split testing. And especially from a business standpoint, they're a lot more likely to pivot into a new business model, okay? Whereas on the other side, if we have, let's say, Germany, they do not like risk or uncertainty at all. So they'll be less likely to actually try new frameworks, test new things, and especially when it comes to a business model, they'll be less likely to switch the business model. They'll stick with one thing and try to essentially perfect that, okay? And you see this especially with their car production. So essentially what this does is, you now, if you're working with somebody that you know is from either of these countries and you kind of see where they are on the scale, you're able to tailor your entire project. So whether you're working as a software engineer or whether you're fulfilling as a business owner, you can tailor every single ounce of communication, every single documentation, and the entire plan as a whole based on that uncertainty index. So if there's somebody who do not like risk, you want to communicate with them constantly. I would even say over communicate with them to make them understand, okay, you're in proper hands, there's no risk, right? But if there's somebody who actually likes taking risks, right, who's actually kind of okay with uncertainty, then guess what? You want to tell them to try new stuff. Hey, let's A/B test this. Let's split test this. Maybe let's try that, right? I don't know, we might end up seeing a better result. So once again, once you know who you're kind of talking with and who you're working with, even if you're on the same team, you can kind of understand which direction to go and what path to take. So with that, let's move on to the next dimension, which is masculinity versus femininity, okay? The mass scale. So in this specific case, this one's very interesting because we'll have essentially the masculine. So I'm going to denote the up as masculine. I'm going to denote the down as feminine. Some cultures are more masculine and other cultures are more feminine, okay? And this is something that's very normal. And specifically here, I would say it's more so regional. For example, USA and Japan are very masculine in a sense. And what I mean by this is that, oops, let me fix this little thing. So in the US and in Japan, in both cases, there's a lot of competition, okay? So, and this is what I mean by masculinity. Competition is urged. The power dynamics are kind of urged in the sense of, hey, you know, who's winning who, or who's beating who, or who's gonna get that bonus, who's gonna get that promotion, right? In both Japan and USA, there's a lot of masculine culture. This is why you'll see in Japan, for example, there's a lot of workaholic people. People work a lot there. But that's because that's expected of them, sort of, right? Everybody's supposed to go into the office, right? And especially there, hierarchy is respected. So sometimes you'll have the boss, let's say, putting in overtime, and the underlings are not allowed to leave unless the boss leaves, okay? It's kind of like extremely masculine and also extremely dependent on hierarchy in Japan. That's why you have a lot of people essentially putting in a lot of work there. Very hardworking people, Japanese people, that is. In the US, you have less of the hierarchy, right? Because we talked about the PDI is kind of low, but they're still quite masculine in the sense that you have a lot of competition, right? Especially if you're in the investment banking space or whatever the case. But even in software engineering, you'll understand that. If you're a junior, somebody can come in and just as easily take your spot or get that promotion to a senior or like a mid-level developer quite easily, right? On the other hand, if you are more of like a feminine culture, if you're from a feminine culture, in this case, I would say most of the Nordics are actually quite feminine in nature. So let's take a look at Norway, for example. If you're dealing with somebody from Norway, it's less about the specific, you know, the competition directly or whatever the case, and it's more about the team culture. So in places such as, for example, the USA and Japan, you'll have a lot of competition for promotions or whatever the case. But in Norway, you'll see a lot more emphasis on team stuff. Okay, so it's less about direct competition and more about how everybody can kind of coexist with each other. It's more about culture building. It's more about creating an environment where it's not necessarily cutthroat and the reward is more money, but rather the reward is maybe a work-life balance and a culture where everybody's happy, everybody works together, right? That's more so Norway style. And once again, this is extremely important, especially if you're a business owner yourself, because determining on who your employees are, you'll be able to kind of dictate your culture. Okay, am I making it more competition based and have money as a reward, or am I making it more so cultural based and have work-life balance as a reward, right? Because either or, can influence people and motivate them to work even harder, right? Depending on which culture they're from. So the next one, let's take a look at LTO, and this one is more so long-term versus short-term. So it's, as the name suggests, is more so about long-term versus short-term, right? So is a culture more tolerant of long-term oriented goals or more so short-term oriented goals? So right off the bat, as you probably already thought of, okay, Japan versus US, and yes, you're right. So long-term oriented, you have more so Asian cultures. So you have Japan, China, right? And short-term oriented, you have more so US, for example. So long-term, for example, Japan, China, you'll have businesses that are maybe over 100 years old, okay? You'll have family, generational run businesses, and people are always talking about the long term, right? And this can influence many things. This is partly one of the reasons that you see most businesses in China have a lot of actual cash, liquid cash in their businesses, because they're always expecting like a doomsday scenario that they can prepare for. So they're looking at things in a very long-term mindset, right? On the opposite end, in the US, everything's about short, quick wins like this, okay? It's less about the long term, and it's more about the short-term realization of your goals, especially financial goals. You can see this even being reflected in social media, right? With a lot of social media in the US, getting rich very quickly, do it when you're young sort of type of mindset, right? And in business as well, do it fast, get there sooner, right? Whereas in Japan and China, it's more about, and I just realized I put Qing instead of China. In Japan and China, it's more about the longevity of the business. So it doesn't just end with their lifetime. They're always thinking about, okay, passing it down to another person. And it's more about how long can I have the business essentially last, right? And how much I can grow it during that time frame, as opposed to USA, maybe I want to get the business to 50 million as soon as possible and just sell it, okay? Once again, this is extremely important for you to know who you're dealing with, whether you're working for somebody like this, whether you have somebody like this on your team, to kind of create the vision around your business or whatever it is that you want to do. If you have a lot of people from Japan or China working with you, for example, you want to create a long-term vision for them to kind of understand and be behind. You want to let them know that, hey, this isn't only about us, right? Future generations from us, our kids, your kids, they're going to be in this as well. And this business is going to last 100, 150 years, 200 years down the line, okay? This business is here to stay. And you can create a long-term oriented vision for them, for your team to be more motivated to kind of follow you. If you're US based, right, you have a lot of people from the US, they want to see quick wins, like short, quick wins, big wins. Then you tell them, hey, this is going to be in the next 5 to 10 years. We got to make it such that we're going to do a very big exit, right? And kind of motivate them like that. Create a vision such that it has more so short-term oriented goals. And then, of course, last but not least, once again, this is extremely important. All of these are important, but each one that I get to, I get more excited about it. This one is indulgence, okay, versus restraint. So I'm going to denote uptake as being more indulgent, and I'm going to denote downtake as being more restrained. Now, when it comes to specific cultures, I mean, there's a lot we can talk about, okay, are they indulgent or restrained? But in this specific case, I'm talking about more so the work environment in general, and I'm tailoring it towards software engineering. US in general is extremely, extremely indulgent, okay? It has one of the most hedonistic cities in the world, right? It has some of the most hedonistic cultures in the world in general. A lot of money, a lot of material stuff in the US. It's very indulgent in certain things. It's talking about food and all that stuff, like media consuming all this information, right? The US in general is quite indulgent. So I'm gonna put US over here, USA. On the other hand, we have more so restrained societies, okay? Now, restrained societies, we have, once again, Japan and China. Now, let me kind of explain what the hell this has to do with specifically business, or even you as a software engineer in this kind of environment. How can you make use of this? Give me 1 second, let me take a really quick water break, because my mouth is extremely dry. I've been taking like 4 or 5 hours today. So, if I'm working with somebody from the US, I know that since they're indulgent, they're gonna naturally want indulgent things. This is why you see in a lot of offices, for example, if you go to Bay Area or even Google and stuff, and especially California, a lot of the offices have game rooms, have things that don't really, it's not professional, so to say, okay? It's more about indulgent, just being indulgent. I have a game room, I have my own, let's say, cafe, I have my own, let's say, cafeteria with an ice cream machine or whatever the case, right? Stuff that you don't particularly need and it's not professional, but because the US is a very indulgent society, they'll have these things at their workplaces, right? And of course, this goes beyond the workplace. This goes pretty much everywhere else. But you gotta understand, okay, who am I dealing with? Am I dealing with somebody from the US? If so, then I wanna have something like that in my culture as well, in my kind of like work environment, or if I'm working with somebody that I know they like these type of things, right? So maybe having a game room for them to kind of come in and play, right? Maybe having like a sick cafeteria room or whatever the case, maybe even an ice cream room or like a cookie room, right? Something like that where you can kind of let them indulge at the workplace or whatever the case, right? Kind of play on the strengths of this indulgence factor, right? If they scale high on this. On the other hand, if you're dealing with somebody a bit more restrained, right? Somebody from Japan and China, guess what? They're not going to want any of that indulgence. So if you have a game room or something like that, they're going to view it as extremely unprofessional and unnecessary. And that might lower your credibility, especially if, let's say you're doing business with them, you're going to meet somebody, right? You want to keep this in mind. Go to everything that I'm saying here, keep in mind that this is for the general people, okay? This isn't like, you might find somebody from China or Japan that doesn't follow this and is quite indulgent. But generally speaking, this is true based on the thousands of people that I've spoken with and done business with, okay? So if I'm working with somebody from the US, especially if I'm meeting them, or let's say even something such as a mastermind such as this, most of the folks that are going to be coming in are going to be from the US. So I have a lot of stuff they can indulge on. I myself, for example, don't drink. I myself don't, smoke or whatever the case, but I'll have a cigar, I'll have alcohol there that they can later indulge should they need to, okay? Because I understand the culture behind it, right? And I brought that up in terms of food and stuff, but even in terms of, let's say, an activity, we have a jacuzzi over there that they can indulge in, we have a beach right downstairs that they can indulge in, right? That's because I understand the culture behind it. But if I had a lot of, let's say Japanese people here or Chinese people here, I would have chosen a more professional venue and less laid back. I would have chosen maybe a high-rise, right? And now at a high-rise office or somewhere with a bit more unique kind of professionalism, right? Kind of with a bit more quality in a sense of upscale quality, right? Not something like chill, such as a beach area. And that's essentially the main difference between ranking on high indulgence or kind of being more restrained, right? And usually everything here is from a 0 to 100 range, so you can kind of understand where each one falls. Now, based on these 6 dimensions, you'll sometimes see very unique combinations. So some countries have their own completely unique numbers that make them a very mind-boggling combination. For example, France. I believe France is the only country in the world where crimes of passion, so infidelity or anything like that, is not viewed as a bad thing. It's kind of like expected. They're kind of indulgent in that sense, okay? So that's why they'll have a lot of TV shows or they'll have the movies about crimes of passion, and in their society it's not necessarily viewed as bad as it might be from the Middle East, for example, right? That's just one example there. But throughout every single country in the world, every single country is so unique in the sense of their culture that based on these 6 dimensions, you'll find something very particular about that culture that you can creatively tailor your entire message on. So whether I'm a software engineer in a working environment and I want to get a promotion, I'm talking to my boss, I know where he's from, I can get on his good side very easily. I can talk to the partners, I can get on the good side very easily. Talking to the CEO, get on their good side very easily. I'm working with people, I know how to get work done because I know the people that I'm working with, right? If I'm a business owner myself, I'm doing a lot of business with, let's say, people from different cultures, right? International business people. I'll be able to tailor it based on where they're from. I'll rank each of these things from 1 through 6, right? I'll get the scores and I'll rank on which ones they ranked highest on to kind of ascertain which one is more important for me to focus on. And I'll literally from A to Z, based on the onboarding, right? All the way to the deboarding process, based on onboarding from the first sales call that I do, all the way to the last call that I have with them where we start working together. Every single thing, every single document, every single communication, everything will be tailored specifically to them. And this is why, especially for software engineers, you might not have any idea what the heck this was, but now you do. So please, I urge you, whether you're an employee, whether you want to start your own business, go and study the Hofstede's cultural dimensions. I'll link down a website you can use. And any person that you're trying to meet, whether you're going to a local Chamber of Commerce event, whether you're going to talk to an old friend from high school, whether you're going to talk to a coworker, understand where they're from, right? All these 6 different dimensions, and custom tailor your approach to them, right? If some cultures, for example, respect gift giving or expect it, do so, give a gift. I've done business with a few Japanese people, and for example, they are extremely big on business cards. For many of you who don't know, business cards are not treated as just regular business cards that they might be in the US. I can take somebody's business card, put them in my pocket, that'll be fine. If I do that with a Japanese person, that'll be extremely disrespectful because a business card is essentially an extension of themselves, okay? So especially if I'm with a Japanese person, if I'm going to be doing something with a Japanese person, I have a separate wallet it's actually called the business card wallet specifically for them, right? I'll bring that out of my way to kind of show them that I know their culture and I can understand based on the Hofstede cultural dimensions that I analyze on them, okay? And the entire process of how I even give the business card, right, with both hands, with a slight bow, right? And I take their business card and I put it in my actual kind of wallet, business card wallet, right? I don't put it in my pocket, that's disrespectful. But all those things play a very important thing, right? So it might be something as small as that, but because you spent the time to kind of understand about them, that makes it so humane for them. It humanizes the connection so much that they instantly start liking you. And first impressions are so important that they can kind of make or break the deal in this type of situations. And remember, we talked about software engineering, we talked about specifically in a work environment, 9-to-5 environment, and in business, but you can apply this to every single aspect of your life. Dating, right, other personal relationships, whatever the case. But hopefully that was beneficial. I'll take your guys' questions. I know you've had a lot of questions right now, but let's stop the video for now and then we'll take the questions after on. But that should be it for the video. Perfect, as always, thank you for watching. Perfect. So today is gonna be a different topic. Today we're gonna be talking about something that is overlooked, I believe, by everybody, be it in business or in just personal life in general. So today's topic gonna be something that, in my opinion, accounts for 99%, well, maybe a little overshoot, but 90% of your success in business, especially as a software engineer. And this is what we call the mundum visum. So this is Latin for worldview. And I know what you're thinking. Great. Another mindset video. We go, great job. We're definitely not tired of it. No, but seriously, every single person here also knows that the most important thing in business, actually in life in general, is this, your worldview. If you take a look at figures such as Elon Musk, if you take a look at figures such as, let's say, Jeff Bezos, the tech giants of the world, the top 3 wealthiest men right now have over $1 trillion. For reference, in some parts of the world, that is more than literally billions of people if you amount all of their wealth. So how can 3 individuals have nearly, well, not nearly, more power and more wealth than some countries in the entire world? One person versus hundreds of millions, if not billions of people. So let's first understand the main difference as to what really accounts as worldview, okay? In essence, worldview is everything that dictates where you are today, where you were 10 years ago, and where you will be 10 years from now. Because your worldview dictates your actions, okay? And your actions, which are basically your ends, so we're gonna mark this as ends, dictate your results. Results. And I'm going to dictate this as out. So your ins, right? You put something in, you get something out. Your worldview, what you believe the world is like, will dictate your actions, and your actions will dictate the results that you get in this life as well as in your business in general, especially as a software engineer. Now, as software engineers, our worldview, right, from what I have found, is quite consistent across all software engineers. It's get a 9-to-5 position, right? Possibly at first an internship of some kind, get that internship, tailor that into a full-time job, and then from then on, grind that job, gain a little bit of experience, possibly do some lead code questions, and hopefully you break into a FANG position. That's one route. The other route is possibly to go the startup route, get some equity within that startup, right? And then IPO and then make millions of dollars, as we saw with, let's say, NVIDIA, right? Pretty much every single NVIDIA employee that was working there about 20 years ago is now a multimillionaire. So that's basically the 2 paths. Go the FANG route, right? Make a lot of money in salary and then 401k it, retire it at, let's say, 40 or 45, 50, whatever the case, or go the startup route, a little bit more risky, right? Try to get equity in that IPO and then make your money off that. Very few people will ever deviate from that path, go on to become startup founders themselves, whether they, you know, create a SaaS or whatever the case. And even those that do, as we already know, 9 out of 10 of them will fail, okay? So what is the main difference between every single one of you watching this? What's your difference with me and what's my difference with let's say the top 3 wealthiest people in the world who actually happen to be software engineers themselves. Once again, it all connects back to worldview, and now let me explain why specifically this is the case. And the reason I say mundum visum instead of just worldview is because mundum visum in Latin, and it translates differently to than just worldview. There's a lot more deeper meaning into the words. Maybe I'll get into the schematics later if need be. But another thing we have to understand. So let's assume that this right here, okay, this is, just assume that it's a black rectangle and I filled it in, okay? And we have observers looking at this specific black rectangle. Imagine I just filled it out, okay? We have 3 observers. This is me. This is you. And here we can have, let's say, Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or whoever the case, whoever you deem to be as the most successful person that you can find. For me, in this specific example, I'm valuing success with regards to the power to impact the world. And in terms of Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, at least in the public eye, they're one of the most powerful people in the world. On the back end of things operate very differently, but for example's sake, let's just go with this. So me right now, let's assume that I have these green lens that I'm wearing, these green goggles. You, on the other hand, have yellow goggles. So here I'm gonna put G, here I'm gonna put yellow. And then we're gonna have Musk here with no goggles whatsoever. What ends up happening is, when I take a look at this black square, black rectangle, right? When somebody asks me to take a look at this black rectangle, I take a look at it, and since I'm wearing green goggles, right? I have a green lens on, I see this as green. Whenever you take a look at this, and because you have yellow lens on, you see this as yellow. When I ask Elon to take a look at this, he sees it for what the true color is, as black. And then the person who's asking us to actually look at the colors, right, and describe what the color was, is asking the observers, us, to describe what color we saw. I say it's green, you say it's yellow, Musk says it's black. I say, you guys are crazy, you're delusional, I literally can see that it's green. You say, you're delusional, I can literally see that it's yellow. We both end up fighting in the comments or whatever the case, life goes on 5 years, 10 years. And Elon over here, he's not bothering with us because he sees that it's black, and the person who asked the question confirms that it is in fact black. Both of us cannot accept this reality, okay? Because to us, this is what our experience has taught us. The life that we've lived until to this point, this is what it has taught us. And we've always, been told by our parents, only judge things that you can see with your own 2 eyes. So in that case, what can we do? If we know objectively speaking that this is in fact black, but we have these goggles on, these lenses on, and we don't even know that we have these lenses on, right? And what can we really do? How can we move forward? Well, let me first explain what these lenses even are and why we have them in the first place. So, like many of you watching, you probably adopted a lot of your current beliefs and a lot of what you hold true about the world, essentially your worldview, how you view the world, from possibly your parents, your environment growing up, right? And potentially genetically as well a little bit. So a little bit of nurture and nature. What do you think the percentage of people are who have these goggles versus who don't have these goggles? Anybody? What percentage do you think of people who have the goggles versus who don't have the goggles is?
About 98% of the people have the goggles.
90 or 98% will have the goggles. Okay, so let's go with that metric right now. 98%. So let's assume 98% are going to have these goggles. And once again, I'm using myself as an example here. This is the yellow goggles. So let's see where these goggles are coming from. So I'm going to point them over here. These goggles stem from childhood, right? Parents, environment, and blah, 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 blah. And whatever essentially you saw. It's a little bit of nature and nurture. So depending on where we grew up, I grew up in a post-Soviet country. For me, my goggles had to do a lot with wealth. I thought the only way you can get rich is if you're a corrupt oligarch and you were ripping off the regular citizens or taxpayers. Somebody else that grew up in a different country, even in a similar country, might share my same exact concerns. Somebody, for example, from the US might see, let's say, a Lamborghini at a gas station or whatever and say, okay, that person can only get that money if they nowadays did like a crypto scam, right? They rugged a meme coin, or they are drug trafficking, or whatever the case. But every single person has these type of goggles. And from the audience, we heard that if we assume 98%, right, have these goggles, then that would mean only 2% do not have these goggles. So this means something very interesting. Every single one of you watching has these goggles, I can guarantee it. Because if you didn't have these goggles, then I would be watching the video that you probably made, right? And even I myself, who have these goggles, I'm still looking constantly to see, do I have these goggles on or not at every single point in time? Because you see, when you observe people such as this person over here with no goggles, you start realizing that there's a lot of things that are simply not true in this world. And the worldview that we held, that stemmed from our childhood, our parents, our environment, simply do not hold true. One of those specifically having to do with business, okay? So if we take a look at, for example, business statistics, right? We have 9 out of 10 startups that fail, right? And then I think it's 50% of businesses within the first year fail, right? 50% within first year. I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head. And then I think 70% or 2/3 within the first 5 years. So essentially the chances of your business lasting over, let's say, like 10 years, it's under 25%. I don't know if this is true, but my guess is this is most likely very true. And if we assume the longer you can stay in business, the better your worldview is, right? Which meaning you have more of a factual worldview, then that would mean that this number in reality would actually have to be probably closer to basically something like that, to the limit, okay? And in reality, you would have something like this. So I would say, from what I have observed, very few people in this world actually do not have these goggles. Everybody has these type of goggles. For some people, it's a very dark color of, let's say, a green or a red. Some people, it's a lighter color. Some people, it might be transparent, but nevertheless, most people still have these goggles. Only very few people in the world do not have these goggles. And most of the time, that's not necessarily within all realms, right? One person can have the goggles within business, but does not have the goggles within something else, let's say fitness, right? This is why you see that there's always an expert in one specific thing. You don't have an expert that's an expert across various industries or various practices. You don't have somebody that's the world's best businessman, also be the world's best fitness coach, let's say, also be the world's best painter, also be the world's best, artist, whatever the case. So in every single endeavor, in every single human endeavor, there's a scale of pretty much who has the goggles and who doesn't have the goggles, and essentially how dark the goggles are versus to how light the goggles are. I have found the more successful the person, the more money that they have made, they tend to be closer on this side with regards to their goggles in business and their worldview of money, how they see money. So if you ask Musk or you ask anybody else, is 100K a lot of money? Is $1 million a lot of money? Or how easy is it to make that amount of money? You're gonna get a completely different answer versus if you ask, let's say, just your everyday average software engineer who's making, 150K a year, okay? So understand that everything you want in life, every single little thing, has to do with these goggles and your worldview. So how do you exactly change your worldview? How do you make sure that your worldview right now is not sabotaging you? Well, you have to ask one very important question that almost nobody asks. What if I'm wrong? So this question is not asked enough. You might ask this on a test if you're taking it. You might ask this on a project you're doing. You might ask this on an assignment you're doing. But you'll never ever ask this question for the long term, be it 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, 15 years down the line. What if you are wrong? What if the current beliefs that you hold, your current worldview, what you believe to be true about the world is wrong? And let's say you ask this question, and yes, you assume that yes, you are wrong. Okay, how do you learn the truth? How do you actually begin to adopt the quote-unquote real worldview and how the real world functions, right? So let alone before you even come here, you first have to get to this point. You first have to ask, what if I'm wrong? What if your current view of money is wrong? What if your current view of business is wrong? What if your current view of, oh, the only way to get rich is to be a bad person is wrong, okay? And it's going to be extremely difficult for you to do so because a lot of you have built your entire worldview, as I mentioned before, on nature and nurture. So it's going to be extremely counterintuitive for you, and it's going to be against your gut to kind of go against that feeling and try to find this quote-unquote real worldview. So how do you do so? Well, you do what I did. You begin actually networking and meeting people who are where you wish to be. By that I mean they live in the house you want to live, they have the family you want to have, right? They have the maybe financial situation you want to have, and they are where you yourself want to be. Where do you meet these people? A lot of different places, right? So right off the bat, it's going to be dependent on your location, but I recommend go to your Chamber of Commerce. So especially those of you in the United States, very easy, or even a BIN, join a BIN. If you're in the United States, you do these two things. Main reason being, you get access to a room full of business owners making multiple millions of dollars every single year, some maybe in the billions, and you get access to them for free. You can talk to them, observe their life, observe their choices, how they run the business, and what beliefs they hold. And you can see somebody who is making essentially an amount of money that you might not have thought possible, but completely for free. You'll maybe end up paying a very small initiation fee to join these places, but all you really have to do is just pick your butt up, go to these places and start communicating with people and talking. Because everything, once again, comes from lack of knowledge, right? Your worldview is constructed from your experiences. But if you haven't had the proper experience, or you haven't kind of seen something that is true, right? You won't ever know if it is true or not. You'll only be able to guess it at best, right? So that's why you need to see it with your own two eyes and experience it and understand that, okay, this is exactly possible. So if you're a software engineer, sign up for your local Chamber of Commerce, sign up to any BIN, right? And start thinking about starting a business and start meeting business owners. Because the most successful people in this world, or I should say financially successful people in this world, are going to be business owners, right? Now, once again, there's some other stuff I cannot talk exactly on YouTube, and I'm not going to, but for this purpose, go ahead and do this, okay? After you join these, what you'll find is there'll be two categories of people. There'll be most likely those like you, those wishing to learn, and there'll be others who you'll learn from. So we'll call them the teachers. Excuse my handwriting. I just realized it is horrendous. It'll be split into two groups. People who are there just like you to learn, and then people who are there to actually teach. And they're not obviously there to teach, but most likely than not, they'll be ending up as your teachers or mentors, whatever the case, because you'll be learning from them. And you'll be able to learn a significant amount from them. And what's going to happen is you'll notice the relationship between these two types of people. The longer you start spending time with them, the more you start adopting their worldviews, the more you start listening to them, the more you start taking action based on what they tell you. Over the course of months, weeks, years, whatever the case, you're slowly going to yourself go from learning to potentially also involuntarily teaching others, because you start becoming the example here. And this cycle constantly repeats. Okay? So what ends up happening, the best way for me to explain this is as follows. Usually, behind every single successful person, there are a mountain of other shoulders that successful person is standing upon. Okay? And I'm not going to get into a self-made argument over here, because that's completely different from what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is even all the great men nowadays, right? They built their current beliefs or their worldview based on previously existing great men. So a lot of people look at Alexander, for example. Alexander the Great, right? Then he inspired however many generals, and then those guys inspired however many people, right? So since you guys are software engineers, you'll understand. This is basically a tree data structure in a sense, okay? And this tree keeps going down, and then we get to, let's say, this point over here, and then we have Elon. So we can definitely take a look at Elon, right? Or we can go back to the roots and see who Elon learned it from all the way up, right? And most of these people will either be Jesus of Nazareth, it'll be Alexander the Great, or maybe we can go even further, right? But you'll have certain centric figures that a lot of people have used as their foundation of what a worldview is and what is possible. So Alexander, I believe at the age of 23, he conquered half of the known world at the time, okay? At the age of 14, he led his first battle on horseback, right? At the age of 23, he conquered half of the known world. At the age of 23, right, one of the first questions that I asked myself was, if Alexander conquered half the world, the known world I should say, at that specific age, am I capable of at least being able to retire my parents? And by retire, I mean fully be able to not only fund their lifestyle, but also make sure they don't ever have to work an ounce in the day, and also make sure that any amount of money they need to do whatever they want to do, they're able to do so. That's what I mean when I say retire. So if we take a look at the worldview that I had at the time, okay, what ends up happening? So I think, I'm like, okay, if I'm 23, will I ever be able to retire my parents, right? So my thought is, if we consider this like a drop in the ocean, right? I'm just a little drop in this big ocean over here. This is just what I want, let's say, out of life, to be able to retire my parents at the age of 23, right? Now, if I were to compare Alexander's drop, what would that look like? Well, probably something like that, right? Because this is only going to impact 2 people in my life, and this, he's conquering half of the known world at the time. And in many of our lives, every single one of us watching, we have this certain thing we want to accomplish at a certain age, okay? Be it a goal, be it a dream we want to achieve. And we'll always measure it up to other people's achievements. So the first thing you need to understand is that, okay, if this was a possibility over here, is this a possibility? And if you follow logical reasoning, yes, it should be a possibility, because the scales over here are astronomical. There's an astronomical difference between these two. So theoretically speaking, if this was possible, then this is surely possible. Okay, so what I do now is I take a look. Are there existing case studies? Anybody else, let's say 23 years or younger, that has been able to retire their parents? You do a little bit of research, you find, yes, one person over here, one person over here, one person over here, one person over here, one person over here. Okay, this is definitely a possibility. All I need now is I know it fundamentally exists, it's capable. Can I myself do it? Okay, now that opens up a different question. Are you yourself capable of achieving these things, right? So let's take a look at what contributes to if you're able to do something or not. And once again, I'm going to leave Alexander over here because I'm going to use him as an example. So from a young age, Alexander was told that he was of divine lineage. More specifically, he was told by his mother that he was the son of Zeus. So already growing up, he had a very narcissistic complex, okay? He had an extremely great ego. And that is because you grow up, you're already a son of a king who's well-known, well-established, well-respected, an authoritative figure. On top of that, you have a mother telling you that you are the son of Zeus, and you are of divine lineage, and the whole world should be in a palm of your hands. So this kid ended up, growing up and adopting this specific belief. And I can tell you that I can erase this name over here, and I can put myself in here. I can erase my name. I can put you in here, or I can put literally almost anybody else in here. And given that same situation, given the same nurture and nature that led to essentially Alexander growing the way he did, and the mother telling him that he's the son of Zeus, pushing these types of beliefs into him at an early young age, and also having him adopt that kind of a worldview that the entire world should be under his rule, any single person here most likely would have been able to achieve what he did, if not more, okay? So the chances of you being in this situation at that exact time frame, right, and being able to achieve what he did, there's a very high possibility that you could have achieved what he did. Of course, I'm not going to get into the nature argument here because, especially if you had a disability or whatever the case. So for that, let's just take that out of the equation. But if you're all healthy, thank the Lord, and you don't have any of those types of issues, let's consider more so the nurture argument, okay? I can replace this question mark any single human being, right? Put them back at that time, give them the same exact mother, give them the same exact father, tell them to essentially treat the person the same exact way as they would have Alexander, and they would have at least still done something great enough to have been recorded in the history books thousands of years later, okay? So that defeats the argument of, can I do it, right? Because at the end of the day, once again, everything links back to our worldview. If we fundamentally have a wrong worldview, right, this is what we'll be able to achieve if we consider this the entire world, okay? The better our worldview, the more we'll be able to achieve and the bigger of an impact we'll have on this world, okay? And the closer that we get to having a proper worldview, the bigger and bigger things we'll be able to actually accomplish. But should we continuously disregard this information and think to ourselves that no, I can only amount to this much, and as I grow older, it's going to get worse and worse and worse, and what's going to happen is it's going to have diminishing returns, and you're going to have the exact opposite of what should happen, which is that over time you understand that your worldview is incorrect, and many of the beliefs that you hold are simply not true, and there is a lot more to this world than you might think there is, okay? And what ends up happening is this is how it should go. At first you believe about this much. You learn more about the world, you start to understand, okay, I can actually amount to this much. You learn even further, you're like, actually, I can probably get to this much. And the more you try, be it in business, be it in whatever the case, the more you fail, the more you learn, the more money you start making, the more people you meet, the more places you travel to, the more cultures you start to understand, the more wealthy individuals you befriend, the more crazy stuff that you see, the more stuff that you experience, and all these things that teach you, the bigger and bigger this gets in specific aspects of life. Be it money, be it health, right? Be it in relationships, whatever the case. This is true for every single endeavor that is human endeavor in this world, okay? And your goal is to go and expand and never ever shrink this kind of impact that you can have on the world. And that is why mundum visum, your worldview, is fundamentally speaking the most important thing that you need to work on in your life. And once again, we already countered the arguments that, oh, I can't do it myself. We just told you how that has completely to do with if you're looking at the right place or not, right? And who you're using as the person that you're studying, right? Always go back to the roots of the person. And the second thing is, am I too late? Or can I still achieve what, let's say, I want to achieve in terms of my dreams, okay? Now, maybe you might not be able to, let's say, ever, whoa, me almost dropped. You might not ever able, let's say, get to this level in your lifetime. But let's say you watched this video and currently right now you're here, and let's just assume I'm God, I'm omnipotent, and I can see the future, and you will have never achieved this anyways, right? But because you watch this video and because you start questioning things, you start asking yourself, what if I'm wrong? Let me just go and make sure that I'm not wrong about this specific thing. Let me try to do everything in my power to get into these specific rooms, to meet these types of people, to try to understand and experience as much as I can about this world to see what's true and what's not true. And then all of a sudden, now you're over here. Maybe it's okay that you didn't get to accomplish this, but at least you didn't die over here knowing that you could have gotten here. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why your worldview is that important.